In this episode of Project Carhaven, I give the cooling system a long overdue flush, make some adjustments to some engine components, give pieces a bit of a paint, and tidy up some loose ends in the engine bay. So after a few weeks away from the Celica, we're back on task with this week. I'm going to flush the radiator, do the valve cover gasket, fit the overflow bottle, the carbon canister, and attempt to address that oil leak that's just appeared. First step, drain the coolant. To do that, I need to take this cover plate off again. And set this drain pan up underneath the bottom hose, take it off, let all the coolant drain. I did make it difficult for myself, didn't I? Not really the colour you want your coolant to be. Should be green. Isn't. Yuck. While that hose is still off, I'm going to take off the thermostat housing and remove the thermostat so all the flushing water can move freely without restriction. What is this? There's no thermostat in here. Yeah, we're going to have a lot of grossness in this cooling system. What is this? It's not much of a gasket either. It won't matter if that leaks a bit while we're flushing it, just as long as we fix it properly after we're done. Just going to try running it for a bit, see if I can get some more water out using the water pump. There's a better look at that in the light. That is very orange. I'm going to try running some fresh water through it a couple of times to see if I can get a bulk of this out just with running the engine, and then I'll put some radiator flush in and let that go to work. Oh yes, also make sure the heater valve's open. Well, this is going to take a few runs. I think I'll come back once I've got it clear and tell you how many times it took. It's probably pretty hard to tell on camera, but it's starting to look more like dirty water than concentrated Fanta. But this is run number 8, and it's still coming out like this. All right, lucky run number 13. It looks kind of dirty here, but I mean, it is dirty, but it's not like Fanta. So I think I'm going to put the radiator flush in next and run that to what the instructions say on the bottle, and then see if we can make it darker than that again. I've got this stuff, and it says to run for 10 minutes, unless your system's really dirty, in which case you should run it for 20. So clearly we're going to be running it for 20. I'll wait till it gets up to temp, bleed all the air bubbles out and put the lid on, and then let it run for the 20 minutes.
"20 minutes later."
So this has been left to cool down for long enough. I should be able to get the cap off. Yep, good. I'll get the bottom hose off and drain it out and See if that flush did anything. Oh yeah, it's darker again. So after using that radiator flush, it has turned the water back to orange juice, dirty orange juice. So I'm sure it has done something, but I need to do something a little bit more aggressive. This is a new toy. It's a radiator flush gun. Compressed air goes through here, garden hose goes there, supercharges the velocity of the water through the radiator and cooling system, and hopefully flushes all that out. Also, I haven't taken out the block drain yet, so I'll do that to try and flush out everything from the lower extremities of the block. So the block drain's just here. Take that off and let the water come out there. Yeah. So I've got it set up in the top hose. I'm going to try and flush everything out and down and see if I actually push something out of that block drain. Oh my God. Wow. Oh. There's just chunks everywhere. So I've never used one before, but this radiator flushing tool was worth every cent spent on it. I don't reckon I could have got that out with just a hose. Definitely worth the investment. If you haven't got one and you need to flush a cooling system, get one of these. So I'll hook the radiator hoses back up again, but I'm going to take them off because I think I'd like to flush the radiator separate from the system itself, just to make sure there's no debris left in the bottom or the top of it. Before I started to do that, I looked down and noticed there was a bolt missing from the radiator support. So then I had to use a ratchet strap to pull the pieces together to get the holes to line up, put the bolts in. And then I also noticed a bolt was missing on the bonnet hinge. So then I had to use vice grips on the backside, pull out the stripped out bolt and put in a new one. All of that's sorted out now, but that's before I set up the camera. So now I'll get back onto the thing I was intending to do, which is remove the radiator. And I think while I've got it out, I might give it a quick rebuild. I did also replace these radiator hose clamps with ones that are more suitable size, so they don't have a big long tail hanging off. Just looks a bit neater. You out of the way. A little bit of water left. It's fine. 12mm with a bit of an extension just to give myself some clearance. It should only be these 4 bolts, I believe. 4 quite long bolts. Really long bolts holding in that radiator. There we go. Let's see if I can get anything out with just the hose alone. And give it a bit of a... There's a little bit of orange there. I'll keep going with that. I think I'm tempted to go and get that cooling system tool and run some pressure through that. I've got a radiator hose set up on the outlet of the radiator at the bottom. The cooling system cleaning tool also hooked up with the hose. I'm just going to turn that on and start pumping air and water through the radiator, hopefully push any debris that's been deposited into the top of the radiator out. I'm going to get wet if I do that. Now I'm just going to go all over the radiator with this small wire brush because I like to punish myself for some reason. Remove all the loose paint and then give it a fresh coat. Get rid of this corrosion around here too. I think for these more heavily corroded pieces, I'm going to go and get the wire brush on the drill and blast them. Let's give that a bit of a rinse, let it dry, hit it with some paint. Alright, so while I'm waiting for the water to dry off that radiator before I paint it, I'm actually going to fit a thermostat to this and replace the gasket. Okay. Good old RTV. And even though it's working, I do have a replacement sender for the temperature gauge, so I'm going to whip that one out and put my new one in because new parts. Actually, I might leave it in place while I sort this out. It'll just save getting any of this crud in those threads. Just cleaning up the seat for the thermostat. Also need to clean up the back side of the thermostat housing. Alright, so both these surfaces are nice and clean now. Next step's to get that sender out. I'll hang on to that. But we do have the replacement. Hopefully it's the right size. Yes. Now, before I put that in, I think I might put some thread sealer on that. Hopefully that will prevent any leaks. Probably tight enough. I don't want to go too far because this is aluminium and I don't want to crack it. Let's make sure we give the surfaces a good clean before putting any liquid gasket on there with the paper gasket. Make sure we get a good seal. A little bit dirty. Got the old Permatex aviation sealant. Apply some to the gasket itself. How does one apply this without getting it all over themselves? The answer is you don't. So I've used the Permatex former gasket sealant, the Permatex Aviation, this stuff. That should prevent any leaks, take up any voids that might be left behind between the paper and the metal. I'll let that sit for a while. The gasket's now fitted to the housing. Now I'm going to rest the housing onto the body of the thermostat. Hopefully that's all still lined up. Some bolts working their way through, hopefully. Yep, can tighten that up and leave it to set. Don't tighten all the way, just try and bring it down evenly. Alright, it feels solid and good. I'll just leave that to set properly. Not that it really sets, that stuff never actually fully hardens, but it will form a seal. I'm just getting this completely ready for painting, and I realise there's a couple of barbs here, probably for automatic transmission cooling. They don't actually go through the radiator system, so just to neaten it up, I'm going to cut these barbs off. Alright, so we got the radiator suspended here, ready to be painted. And I always like using this Rust-Oleum 2X stuff. Not sponsored, I just think the paint covers really well, levels out nicely, gives good coverage, so let's get to it. So while I'm waiting for that paint to dry on the radiator, I started doing what I normally do and distracted myself by looking at other things in the engine bay. So I started by getting some new bolts to put on the radiator that are a bit shorter, and these are high tensile bolts. It'll take much less time to take them out. Then I was thinking, well, I went to all that trouble, I should probably put on the new radiator hoses that I bought. So I've gone and dug them out. That one's still the old one, I'm yet to put those on. Then I noticed the wire for the temperature sender, all the heat protective shielding was all flaking off. So I tore that off. So now I'm going to need to order like a silicone high temp sleeve to cover that wire. And then I started looking at this, which is for the water feed to the heater box for the demister. It looks really ugly, and right here is bulged out and very soft. That's just waiting to explode almost as soon as I start driving the car, dumping all the coolant and making the car overheat. I don't ever intend on driving the car in conditions that would require a demister, so I think this can get deleted. Even though I know I replaced the heater tap on the heater box, but it's what I do. Be able to get rid of this ugly bracket and the hose and everything, and I just need to cap off from the outlet from the water pump, put a plug in the block, and it should be good. With the dipstick, give myself a bit better access to this. No, you know what? This is a much better option. Put that back on there so it can hold the exhaust manifold back on. Too big. That's what she said. It's a rubber cap for the water pump outlet. Hose clamp. And I created a plug out of the old barb for the block. Nice and tight. Okay. That's that job taken care of. And get our fully rebuilt radiator put back in. Gently, slowly. That hose is in the way. And so is that one. New shorter bolts. Hopefully they fit. Some allowance for a bit of movement there, just need to make sure I get it somewhat level. Okay. Secure. Lower Toyota hose from Gates. Part number there. Top radiator hose replacement from McKay, the CH1044. Here's a match. Good. Now the original cap happens to be a genuine Ford one, but it fit the Toyota. Seemed to be sealing fine, but that there, all the cracks in it, that's perishing. The rubber's failing, so instead of waiting for it to die completely, just get a new replacement. Fits well. I've got myself a metal 1 litre catch can to use as a radiator overflow. I'm using these brackets, which happen to line up perfectly with the holes on that. And to here, on the frame, also line up perfectly, so I don't even have to drill anything. It's got a little sight tube so I'll be able to see the level of coolant without taking the lid off. And there's some plugs and barbs, of which the orientation I need to switch around to suit the application. So I want the radiator inlet to come into the bottom of the bottle, and if it does need to overflow, I'll have one on the high side here, which will be the same as the standard overflow bottle setup. Take these out. 6mm Allen key for those. All these fittings have O-rings on them, so it shouldn't leak. Alright, that's the port orientation all set up the way I want it. These brackets didn't actually come as a kit, they're just galvanised brackets from the hardware store. I'm going to use some bolts with spring washers and a nut to hold them onto the brackets and then fix them to the car. So that's the brackets bolted onto the overflow. Overflow is supposed to line up with these two holes, and it does perfectly. It's like it was meant to be. So I'll just use some low pressure fuel hose to run to the overflow, which is rated to about 50 psi. It's more than enough to handle the pressure the cooling system might put out. Perfect. It's got a carbon canister from a Volkswagen Jetta mounted to a custom bracket that I made to live in here. It's not really required. It wasn't in the car when I got it, but it will sort of help trap any fuel vapors from the tank if the car's parked in a hot area, and the bleed off will run straight to the intake there, which the car will draw in once it's running. Get these bolts out. Line up there. Will it fit? Yes. Secure. So it's got a specific line that suits. This goes into the carbon canister. I need to cut this end off, fit an adapting barb, because I need a 13mm ID hose to lead into the carburetor. It's canister fitted, line fitted, barbs fitted, hooked up to the air filter. That's that job done. Next, I think I'll pull the valve cover off and get that ready for paint. So even though it's unlikely I'll get these messed up and put back in the wrong order, I'm going to put some tape on the leads, mark them with which cylinder they belong to, so there's no chance I can get it wrong. Alright, let's get this off. Beautiful. And valve cover bolts. Ooh. Okay. Yep. It's pretty clean in here, I guess, considering all things. Get rid of this old gasket and have a better look at what's going on in the head. Well, it is far from perfect, but, you know, it's not that terrible either, really. Alright, these spark plug hole boots off. Bye. Well, off camera I did start giving these a bit of a clean, and although they're pliable, they are delaminating. You know, they're sort of just falling apart. So, yep, good move to get rid of these while I'm in there changing the valve cover gasket. Now I've got the tedious part of trying to get the rest of this gasket off and get the surface all clean. Same with the valve cover. Okay, so I did a bit of cleaning in here. I've cleaned up the surface for the gasket. I put the spark plugs back in. I'm going to place the spark plug hole gaskets in here so I don't misplace them. Now I'm going to move on to cleaning up the valve cover. Out to the favoured location for doing such things, on the lawn. Bit of eye protection, i.e. my glasses. I'm just going to try and wire brush off all this corrosion to give a nice surface for the paint to adhere to. Now this is a wrinkle effect paint, but it didn't come with any instructions, and usually they're pretty finicky on their application method. So I just looked up the application method for the VHT wrinkle paint and copied that. I started with one first light coat, followed by 3 very heavy coats applied in different directions for each coat, and then once that had sort of dried, sit it in the barbecue to bake it to cure. So now the valve cover has been baked and cured, and the effect actually turned out okay. There's a fairly nice, even, very fine wrinkle finish, except for the areas I masked off. I'm probably not going to clean these up any more than this. It's enough of a contrast against the black paint. But before I refit this, I may as well check the valve clearance tolerances and adjust accordingly. So in order to do that, we need to get these out of the way. The workshop manual states you need to get it onto the compression stroke on cylinder 1 and then check the intake side on cylinders 1 and 2, exhaust side on 1 and 3, then rotate the engine 1 full revolution, do the intake on 3 and 4, and do the exhaust on 2 and 4, and that's all of them adjusted. So intake side when cold is 0.18, exhaust side is 0.30. First step, get it to top dead center on number 1. I've already taken the spark plug out, set a screwdriver on top of the piston to make sure we're heading for compression stroke on number 1. Take the distributor cap off, find lead number 1, get the rotor button pointing towards number 1 when this is at the top, and that's the compression stroke. Started going down. That's at the top. Starts dropping. So halfway through that movement, that's about as close to bang on top dead center as we're going to get. Check the intake on 1 and 2. I can get it in, but I can't get it to pass through. That's too tight. I can start to get it in, but it doesn't pass through. Same with that. Need to double check if that's right. Should pass all the way through, surely. Alright, let's see how we go here. That passes through now. Let's double check, make sure that hasn't shifted. That's good. Yep, a little bit of drag. Let's double check these again. Slight amount of drag. That one closed up on me. A little bit of drag. Okay. Knuckle buster. 1 and 3 for exhaust. Well, that's good. 1 full revolution. Get that screwdriver all the way down and back up to the top, and that'll be the exhaust stroke. About there. 2 no good. 4 no good. Now it's tight. Recheck again. Yep. Why is that kicked off to the side? That's not right. I must have done that. I'm happy with that. So that's the valve cover here. Silicon valve cover gasket. So I ended up finding a torque spec for these valve cover nuts, and it's between 3 and 5 foot-pounds. So I was actually only between 1/8 and 1/4 of a turn off. Good enough, but they have been torqued down to a spec now. Get this guy tightened up. Got some super chrome look plastic plug wire clamps to try and neaten this mess up a bit. I would have preferred black, but you know, this is what I could get. Now I'm being pedantic. I think I want to swap these two, which means I've got to redo the rest. Well, I've still got to add coolant to the system, so I don't know if it leaks or not. Hopefully not. I need to get the engine running so I can bleed all the air out. And also it would be good to make sure I haven't stuffed anything up by that work I just did. So I'll throw the battery in and fire it up. No spark, no start. I can smell the fuel. All right, checking for spark. Yeah, quick little test showed there was no spark. The main lead from the coil to the distributor seemed like it was fully seated but wasn't. Gave it a good knock, and now I believe it'll start. I think the valve train's actually a little bit quieter from that adjustment, so I guess that's a good thing. Bit of coolant concentrate that I've already watered down. Let's get this radiator filled. Run this till it gets up to temperature, allow the thermostat, now that actually has one, to open and bleed any air out, and then get the radiator topped off, put a bit in the overflow and call that done. So as you can see, there's a nice stain of oil on the bottom of the bell housing of the transmission, which wasn't there before. So that means either the crankshaft seal has worn or the input shaft to the gearbox has worn. One of those fluids is leaking out and running out of the bell housing. If it's the crank seal, then possibly the clutch is soaked in oil, so that's stuff too. So that means, once again, I have to go online, order some more parts. That's going to be in the next episode, I guess. So for now, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.